listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me again, Kevin Durso. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been a fun couple of weeks. You know, kind of at the height of summer. I saw Simple Plan the other day. You know, it's been fun. But
classic summer material. You know, just looking for something to do to buy your time until
Absolutely. I think we did best concerts of all time. Or we've done best concerts before, so we're not going to get into that today.
No. I know, but you know what I mean. It's just you're looking for whatever you can to fill the gap.
Right.
You know, I can openly admit that the amount of writing I've done lately is minuscule at best because there's just nothing to talk about at the moment, or not a lot to. So probably post Labor Day we'll get into it. We're getting closer to that, so we're getting
the good news is we're starting to turn the corner on the off season. We have some news starting. We have a couple of contracts starting to come through, some extensions from around the league that we'll get into later in the show. We are going to kick off with some Flyers news here, but before we do that, hit us on the socials, subscribe on YouTube, etc., etc. Okay. Just getting right into it. The first thing we have today is the Ivan Fedotov situation. Ivan Fedotov is a goalie prospect, if you're not aware, that has come through the Flyers, has begun the process of coming through the Flyers system.
Right. Was drafted by the Flyers. We can start there.
Right. Last summer, he signed a contract intending to come to North America. Allegations about attempting to avoid draft service. We don't know about that. Either way, he was... I believe he was apprehended at the airport, was he not?
No, he was coming out of I thought he was coming out of like a practice rink or something. Like he was working out in general, and he came out like
maybe that was it. Okay,
it was but either way,
he was pulled into that contractual military service. Spent a year in the middle of nowhere. Has returned to hockey, and we come to an interesting situation with his contract because he did sign that contract with the Flyers. Mm-hmm. But he also now has a contract with CSKA Moscow in.
Sure. So let's kind of clear the table and get like everything lined up, ducks in a row kind of stuff before we get into like where everything currently stands. Because when we left the last show, we kind of attached this as a footnote at the end that there was a pending decision with the IIHF that was supposedly at the time coming Monday of the week of our previous show, and it sure enough did. You know, that came out. The contract with the Flyers is valid. Basically, the bottom line is he had signed the contract with the Flyers last summer, like you said, and because he was never able to fulfill it, when the time came this offseason for the Flyers to issue qualifying offers, they also told the contract, which basically means they just pushed it down the line to this upcoming season.
Right.
So, by all accounts in the NHL, Ivan Fedotov has an NHL contract.
Right. And it's in the NHL office. It's there.
And at the same time, or around the same time, Fedotov also signed a 2-year deal in the KHL with CSKA Moscow and was going to presumably play there. That was what everybody kind of had it. Like, if you read anything about it going up to that point, it was all lined up that basically, you know, while he has this contract with the Flyers, it was like it was all overridden in the eyes of everybody else. And it was, he's going to go through with this and play in Russia. That's the way it's going to be.
Right.
And ultimately it led to this decision-making process where the IIHF was involved and was going to have to determine which contract was valid. It's a little bit like an arbitration situation to an extent where you're basically determining which team really gets his rights as this upcoming season hits. And
but instead of a private lawyer, it's the IIHF.
Sure. And according and let's not forget also, in addition to determining which contract is valid, which, like I said, they determined the Flyers contract was the valid contract, there were also sanctions issued against CSKA Moscow, against Fedotov himself even, that now kind of prevent a bunch of different things. There was, first of all, it was that Fedotov could not play for CSKA Moscow or in the KHL. It couldn't play any national or international games in Russia. So in other words, not Russian KHL games or international competition with Russia until after January 1st of 2024. That was the first portion. And overall, one of the other parts of this was that CSKA Moscow also had a suspension placed on international transfers. I think it was a year-long suspension for that. So there's a lot of like details in place for that and things like that. But obviously, just because this ruling was issued did not mean we had any answers whatsoever. it was, we were waiting to find out whether or not he was actually going to go. We were waiting to find out, because obviously the next hurdle to get through at this point is he actually coming to North America? Is his intention actually to play for the Flyers? What is going to happen from here? Where is this going to go? And it's kind of trying to figure that whole thing out at this point. And it's just continues the complication, because at the end of the day, despite the fact that, yes, you got an answer of which contract is valid, you don't have any firm answers on anything future wise at this point. You have questions about where he's going to play.
And that brings us to kind of the reason why. And the reason why, in the grand scheme of things, is Russia. Is because Russia. Because
Probably.
for the last several hundred years, frankly, Russia does what Russia wants, is kind of the end of it here. And they decided that he wasn't going to go show up at Flyers training camp and maybe be their backup last year, or play for the Phantoms, or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. They decided he was going to go be in the military, and then he comes back, and they decided that he's still not going to come over. He's going to be in Russia. And I don't know how much of this is the player, and I don't know how much of this is pressure from above him in the Russian hockey hierarchy, going, frankly, all the way up. But at the end of the day, it's hard to give the player too much of a hard time, because we don't know what they're going through, and we've heard a variety of things. But as it sits, we did have the IIHF, like you said, we have the IIHF ruling that the Flyers contract is valid. And if the player remains in Russia and the contract in the NHL is valid, what does that mean? Like, is he playing in the KHL? Is his KHL contract also valid? Is this a loan?
Right.
How are we parsing this?
It's super complicated. And you've got to factor in the fact that the whole suspension, but you know what I mean? The fact that he's not technically allowed to play for a Russian team or in the KHL or any of that, as of literally the end of this upcoming week, September 1st, he's not allowed to play a KHL game based on the way that the ruling was issued. That being said, it's tricky, because he's either going to just take 4 months off and not play anywhere, or he's going to come over. And we're getting close enough to, we're also getting close enough to Flyers training camp at this point where, look, you got to be prepared for the fact that he may not be on the training camp roster. Straight up. Like, you got to be prepared for that fact and prepared for the idea that this is not realistically, this is not part of your team's future anymore. Like, it's kind of getting to that point already. I mean, we already kind of talked about this a little bit.
I have a question for you. Is there a world? So are these stipulations Russia specific, or are they KHL specific?
What do you mean by that?
Because I can see a world where so what I'm thinking is Moscow loans him to a non-Russian team somewhere in the KHL system, the NHL, the VHL, one of those leagues, and he goes and plays in Belarus for the next 4 months.
I don't know. That's an interesting one.
I feel like that's the kind of thing they would do to get him. That feels like the sort of thing that's in the playbook.
Oh, I'm sure there's a whole book of tactics, like you said.
So that'll just about do it on Fedotov. At this point, we kind of just have to wait and see. And honestly, we see if he shows up to camp at this point. That'll kind of answer that question.
I mean, you might even have answers slightly before that, just because if he if something happens, I mean, he's not supposed to be able to continue playing in the KHL beyond September 1st. But if something changes, like we were kind of talking about before we started recording the show and stuff like that, he played Sunday afternoon or Sunday, I guess Sunday morning, maybe if you're talking U.S. time here. But like, he played Sunday
in a preseason game, right?
In a preseason game in the KHL, absolutely. So, like, kind of answers some of your questions already right there. You know what I mean? Like if he's still playing preseason games and it's the week before everything happens and there's, it kind of tells you everything you need to know already. So just kind of leave it at that where we stand.
Right. And if he shows up to camp, great. But someone who we do know will show up at camp, presumably, is Oliver Bonk, because he signed his entry-level deal.
Yep.
And it's good to see out of the kid. It's standard entry-level deal. I don't think we're looking at a roster player here. He's probably going to go back to, is he playing juniors?
Yes.
Yeah, he's probably going back to juniors. Like
he will be on the London Knights this year. Absolutely 1,000%. He will be on the London Knights this year. Probably next year too, honestly.
Yeah, and I expect him to hang out through the preseason. If you're going to be a bad team and rebuild and blah 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 blah, I could see them thinking about giving him 5 or 6 games or 4 or 5 games and then sending him down before the contract slides.
I don't know about that many. Just because with kids that young. With kids that young out of a draft year, it's probably a little much. That's two is probably a good number. He might play in 2. He's kind of really become something that's really interesting about him is.
Well, I think you keep him up for the first 4 or 5, and then put him in for maybe 2 in there. But
it'll also depend on when junior camps really get going and things like that, because they'll line it up that he's a regular part of that. That's the way they'll do that. He really has become, though, in a sense, given the fact that the next 2 highest prospects, and I'm not saying that makes him the 3rd prospect. I'm not saying that, but if we're going off of recency, your first-round pick from 22 and your other first-round pick from 23 are not going to be part of the roster or even signed until a future date.
Right.
So he has kind of, in effect, become the headliner of the last handful of first rounders. Like it's kind of like he's after Tyson Forster in terms of first rounders, because Cutter Gauthier is going to play at BC and because Matvei Mishkov is under contract in the KHL. It's kind of created that dynamic where like I don't know if you saw this or not, but the Flyers continued their little YouTube series kind of thing, and they've been doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And there was a big focus on the fact that Oliver Bonk was like one of the key prospects that was at development camp.
Yeah. And this is a guy that, again, we're talking about the Danny Briere era being here, and I know he got in right before the draft and, wasn't fully, but he had enough time where he probably had enough ideas that Oliver Bonk might very well be a Danny Briere pick. And we're talking about down the road, a couple years in the future, coming out of a rebuild. You're not going to pick somebody unless you could see them being a part of it.
Sure, of course not. I mean, and I think there's also elements of the kind of player he is, because he's got this almost kind of all around defensive ability. Like he's supposed to be mobile. He can jump up offensively. I think the most important quality is that he's a right-handed shot. So he's a right-handed defenseman. I think that there's clearly an emphasis on that as well. Now, is he a cornerstone defenseman? No, probably not. I mean, it would take some serious increases in his development to be that, but he's definitely more in line with like one of these players who probably slots into your middle pairing or something of that sort. I mean, and who knows, like it's so early because he's only 18 and because he's just been drafted. You can't put like labels on him just yet. You can guess, but you
don't even know if he's going to stay 6'2". Like he's 6'2". He's already big for his age, but I'm above 6.5 foot tall, and I grew until I was about 22. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that he gets to 6'3", 6'4". I'm not saying he's going to get that big, but he might pack on another inch or 2, and he's listed at 176. He fills out a little bit.
Well, yeah, that the filling out process is something that they all look into. So.
Absolutely. This guy is going to be enormous. And that, like, given where the NHL is going, it's perfect.
Yeah, so you get, and it's just about waiting out the process, like, and not to mention the fact that like between him and the Flyers also drafted his teammate Denver Barkey out of who's going to play for London also. So that could be a really good junior team this year.
Man, picking London Knights, it has worked out well for pretty much every team that's ever done it. They just pump out NHL talent.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right? Like, and I'm not saying Denver Barkey's Mitch Marner, but like,
no, but you're talking about it's no different. I mean, like we're doing the same
powerhouse.
thing. And that's like it's a junior version of kind of what it's sometimes the way we talk about Boston College in that sense, because Boston College just pumps them out too, like nobody's business. That like how many and that's kind of one of the interesting things, because it's one of the things I'm going to probably write about as we get a little like post Labor Day into the start of the season kind of stuff, is how much focus is going to be away from the Flyers a little bit too, because we're going to pay a lot of attention to Cutter Gauthier, and we're going to pay a lot of attention to what Matvei Mishkov is doing in Russia, and we're going to pay a lot of attention to Oliver Bonk and other players who are in this draft class.
Absolutely.
And
we're going to pay attention to the Phantoms more than most people probably do.
You're right. I mean, the only way we're not paying that much attention to the Phantoms is if more players than we is if more players than we think are actually getting NHL playing time. I have to believe that there is a significant chance, and like by significant I mean I would say 80% or better already, without even having seen him in training camp, that there's an 80% chance or better that Tyson Foerster is on the NHL roster.
Oh yeah. But I'm not going to be overly convinced about maybe some other guys who are down there who maybe got a taste. I'm not going to be overly convinced about Ole Lixel. I'm not going to be overly convinced about Ronnie Attard. I'm not going to be overly convinced about Elliot Desnoyers. Like, there's other players who may get a chance to play up at that level. That they're going to be in competition. So, like, there's a distinct possibility that one of the final defenseman spots comes down to Ronnie Attard and Emil Andre. Who wins? Who gets it? And whoever doesn't probably goes to the minors and plays top pair. Yep.
That's how it's going to work. And then you are paying attention to the minor leagues. But what if it's not? What if it's not? So that's what we got to wait for. But that's what's going to make training camp fun. Training camp's going to be fun because it's definitely all about battles. Yep. It's going to be all about battles. And then once the battles are over, once you see where everybody lands outside of the obvious players like Gauthier going to BC for another year and Mishkov playing in Russia, and look, sure, the younger players who just got drafted like Oliver Bonk going back to the OHL, playing for the London Knights, all that type of stuff. Once you get past that group, whoever ends up on the Phantoms, whoever ends up somewhere else, like the rest of them that go to juniors, or whoever makes the Flyers out of camp, it's all going to come into play, and then you're going to start to kind of watch accordingly. You're going to try, and you're definitely going to try to access it.
Right.
Like, it's going to be, I can only imagine how, look, Russian games are a little bit tougher to get a hold of, but I can only imagine how many Flyers fans are going to be tuning in if BC makes, gets any airtime outside of the Boston area. You know what I mean?
By the way, little alert for people who may be watching this or maybe, listening to the show. ESPN Plus has a lot of college sports, a lot of college hockey. When it comes time, if you're looking for these games, try your ESPN Plus app. But yeah, it's going to be an exciting couple of years, honestly, because this is just the first year. We are heading into the rebuild. And find your sources, set them up now, get comfy with them, because it's going to be a couple of years. And if you're in it for the long haul, I can't wait to watch Denver Barkey play for the Phantoms in 24-25. I can't wait.
I mean, and we're going to have to wait and see how this all shakes out with everybody. But there's a lot of players who, there's just going to be a lot of players. Like, I don't think that they definitely haven't overstocked their prospect pool yet. That takes years to do.
No, of course not.
But they've got a lot in place now than they, way more now than they did a handful of years ago. I mean, there's a big difference between getting excited about maybe a goalie like Sam Harrison coming up to make his debut last year, and Ole Lixel, and waiting it out for a guy like Tyson Foerster to come in and then be like, oh, okay, now like Tyson Foerster gets your attention pretty quickly, right? But it's not the same thing with some of the other guys that they've had come up, maybe debut for a handful of games, and then maybe Noah Cates a little bit, because Cates kind of took to it pretty quickly, and that helps. Like, if a guy impresses, it helps. but we'll see. We'll
Right.
see where everything shakes out over the next few years. But maybe if we want to continue to build off of what we've already started with, because Bonk factors into this, and it's like we said, it's your traditional entry level deal. There's not a lot to break down with it. It was just it was the only other piece of Flyers news we got in the last 2 weeks. So you got to give us that, but one of the things I wanted to bring up is because this, over the course of the last roughly week, I want to say the Athletic was doing some prospect breakdowns, and it was kind of done as
Corey Pronman does his annual breakdown every year, and shout out Corey Pronman, and also shout out the Athletic. It's a great source of sports journalism.
So I want to clarify, because it's at the bottom of the article here, that all skaters 22 years old or younger as of September 15th, 2023 are eligible to make the list. So you're ruling out anybody who's 23 years or older. So
and
that's going to take out a lot of players right off the bat, right?
Well, and right at the top of his article, key graduates, he lists Joel Farabee as kind of the most recent guy to turn 23 and age out of what they consider a prospect, and that's fair.
And you can also fill in the blanks of some of the other guys who have recently enough graduated, because Morgan Frost is in that category. Owen those are guys. Owen Tippett and Morgan Frost are both 24.
Right.
So you're in that range where it's like, they're out of this
23
running
pretty recently.
Well, no, but they're still young key exactly. Like they're still young enough to be key pieces of the future. It's just they're not going to make this list, so don't be listening out for their names. That's all. Now, it's not really a secret who the top 2 on the list are, because we've already mentioned their names on multiple occasions already on this show. So Mishkov is number 1 and Gauthier is number 2, and that's pretty unsurprising, obviously. I mean,
right. I mean, you ask most scouts before the 2023 draft and ask them who the most talented player is, and they'll tell you Connor Bedard, and that's fair. But ask them who the second most talented player is, and a lot of them would tell you it's Matvei Michkov.
Sure, and we've seen, there's clips that float around, and we've seen a few of them and things like that, and it is what it is. I mean, it's a lot of preseason games, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, it's preseason.
Of course.
We'll have to wait and see what happens when his regular season starts, what kind of role he gets, and things like that. It's going to drive people crazy to an extent if you try to overanalyze everything for the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
Like a little bit. Like you got to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and just roll with the process here a little bit. Like it makes way more sense, especially going off of the entirety of last year. It makes way more sense to be pumping the tires heavily and really I wouldn't say overlooking, because overlooking is kind of not the right word there. But maybe reading into a lot of what you see from Cutter Gauthier, because the intention is, and it seems like it's already out there kind of, the intention is he'll play at BC, and when the season's over, here he comes.
Right.
And after playing in World Championships and after now becoming a sophomore member of a Boston College team that has some high expectations and is getting a lot of talent, now you're going to pay a lot of attention to what happens when Cutter Gauthier has a lot of talent around him, is playing for a top-notch college program, has played recently in World Championships, which put him, forget about playing up against seniors who are 22, 23 years old. He's played up against 30-year-olds at this point.
Boston College is going to be a fun team to watch this year.
And if you come away from that thinking, wow, look at how great Cutter Gauthier looks at this level, you have reason to read into it a lot, because that is something that is something that is very much on the table for next year. Like, he's probably a Flyer next year. That's the way that this is shaping up to be.
I don't expect him to spend a whole lot of time, if any, in Lehigh Valley.
Exactly. Now, if you do the same thing for Mishkov, who has years before he's probably coming over.
Michkov is definitely walking straight in.
He is, but you can't. But if you've got years to get there, just watch the progression instead of trying to overanalyze who he is at 18.
Right.
Because let's put it this way. He's going to do things where he's making a mistake. He's going to make mistakes. He's playing in a professional, and not only that, he's a kid playing in a professional hockey league.
Right.
It's not the same thing as, hey, we sent you back to juniors. You should know better than to do that against the 16-year-old who shouldn't be able to take the puck away from you. You know what I mean? Like, if he plays against, let's put it this way. If I'm not mistaken, didn't his team just sign Alex Galchenyuk? I think I just saw they just signed because Galchenyuk obviously was going to have a contract in the NHL, and then that
didn't
went by it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I believe that just happened. that Alex Galchenyuk just signed there. So, but
That's
and it's
interesting.
and that's not to make it seem like he's, that's a guy who's gonna like seriously help improve, improve the roster a ton or improve his
But
play.
it's a North American pro to pick his brain to figure out how it works.
Yeah, he did. So Galchenyuk just signed there, and
Okay.
but the point being, that's not a player who's between the ages of 18 and 22, or even 25 for that matter. That's a player who's been around the block a little bit, who is now a teammate of his.
Exactly.
Like, just is the way it is, and obviously there are players on that roster who are also not in the same position as Mishkov is, like Ivan Demidov, who is a highly touted prospect for next year's draft. Like, you've got guys like that too. So you've got to factor all of these pieces in, but just don't overanalyze Matvei Mishkov so much in year one of this time in the KHL and post draft, and like enjoy what he does and understand there's going to be growing pains as well.
I do just have to say, if you're a Spit and Chicklets listener, man, Galchenyuk's going to be a menace on the Russian gas. Oh, goodness gracious. Anyway, I agree that you shouldn't be reading too much into Michkov at this point in time. He's playing amongst men. He is still a kid. He is 5'10". He's not enormous. Like we talked about Bonk being enormous. Michkov is not.
And that's not to say also that once the regular season starts, don't get excited about a highlight reel play if he makes one. Like, of course, get excited. But
playing amongst men.
But just also, just slow down a little
bit.
With
it. And the scoring in the KHL is weird anyway, because
it definitely is. But
it's such a league of haves and have-nots that games are either nothing or 14-2.
It's really crazy.
It's a wild league, and stats coming out of that league, like most information coming out of Russia, is not really to be trusted.
It's a little bit. I mean, like there's also an element like I remember when a lot of Flyers fans were really heavily invested in the Swedish league, because at the time it would be like Oscar Lindblom and Sam Ersson and Felix Sandstrom, and they were all playing at the same time, kind of.
Yeah.
And And I remember it was great. I guess it was great to have a bunch of goalies at that time, because the scores were always like 3-2 and 2-1 and stuff like that. Like if you had 13 goals in the Swedish league, you were like an elite goal scorer.
Yeah, it's wild.
Like it was pretty crazy.
It's amazing how many players come over here and just pop off, and you look at their numbers from over there and you're like, man, they didn't do much. It's like, no, they did. That's elite scoring.
Oh yeah. So do we want to go through a little bit more of the rest of this list just to kind of piece together some stuff?
The usual names do pop up, established NHL names like Cam York.
For the most part, I mean, there's some interesting things in here, because, like, for example, we just talked about Emil Andre a little bit, and in Pronman's article, it has that he has a chance to play. I think he's probably a little higher on the list than that, probably. Like, first of all, the guy's a smooth skater. Like, he's really good in that respect, and
he'll play at some point. Like, even if he ends up not necessarily winning that roster spot and making the opening night roster, like,
I mean,
first injury on the blue line, Emil Andre's your call up. More than likely.
I mean, and they know what I think that they know what they have. It's why think about how quickly kind of things came together with that, like that he was signing an entry level deal and things like that. Like at one point in time, I think they started with him as an amateur tryout, that he was gonna, when his season was over overseas, he was going to come over on an amateur tryout, and it was like pretty quickly something like changed. Like it became no, sign him to the entry level deal ASAP, because
right now,
if you don't risk anything about him not being part of this franchise moving forward. You're going to want him around. So just important to keep in mind there. So like that's all I'm saying. Like, because that's an interesting one when you consider some of the other players we're going to get to. Cam York is third on the list, which I understand. Like, he still, first of all, he still qualifies under the age limit, obviously.
Yep. And he's going to be probably a top 4 defenseman in the NHL this year.
Absolutely, 1,000%. And he's going to. You're looking for him to take a bigger step, obviously, because he's got some. Like, we've seen some flashes of skill, and we've seen, his defensive game can be solid, but he's got to do it more consistently, obviously. I mean, and he didn't get a full. If we're being technical about it, he didn't get a full season last year just because of the fact that he was down in the minors for a good chunk of the beginning of the season. I don't think he didn't really get regular time until December.
Right.
And then from there, he was up for good. I think he finished with 53 games in the NHL or something like that. So
yeah,
you're working towards something, but now, like, I don't think there's, like, especially after you traded Ivan Provorov in the offseason, it's kind of no doubt where he's going to stand now in terms of, like, you're going to make the team.
He's kind of going to slide into that Ivan Provorov spot here, I think, pretty cleanly. A guy we had high expectations for, that he's going to turn out to be good, and that's great.
It's a little different for him for two reasons to me. Number one is that he did go a little lower in the draft. Like, when
That's
Provorov
fair.
goes top 10, you do really have lofty expectations.
It's valid.
York went in that middle of the pack kind of area where you start to think you're getting good, not great per se. Like, you're happy with sometimes, I mean, depending on the draft, obviously, like this, I don't know if you're happy about it this past draft year, if your 14th overall pick isn't playing a little bit like closer to a top 10.
Fair.
But in most drafts, if you pick 14th overall, your answer usually is if he can play second line, second pair, something of that nature, you did pretty well. And
yeah, and it seems
York
like that's where
qualified.
Cam York is at this point. And he is still young enough that if he does level up his game and take that next step, it's not insane to see him as kind of a lower end top pair defenseman, but that's fine,
So I'm going to be able to go through the next two on the list really quick because we've already talked about them a little bit. Oliver Bonk was 4.
Yep.
And Tyson Forster is number 5. And like I said, I think now, again, this is really interesting stuff because Praman does tier level type things to him, like we just talked about. Like he's got like Praman's tier level for what these players are. Mishkov's an elite NHL player, or projects to be. Gautier's a top of the lineup player, and that this all makes sense because this is exactly the way we've kind of treated this, right? And then we just said, York is kind of more middle of the lineup, and we just talked about Bonk being a little bit like that too. Like maybe second pairing is more of the fit, right? Or even. Right. I mean, Bonk maybe has an outside chance of being a top pair, second D kind of guy, but
right.
That remains to be seen. Development, especially as early as he is, will go a long way. What's interesting is he has Tyson Forster, who we've already seen play NHL games as a tier level of projected to play NHL games, which I think
he means projected to play more, projected to be a guy.
Well, no,
I read that as projected to be a guy.
Well, I don't know about that. Like, I think that it's like compared to what? Middle of the lineup? Like, middle of the lineup, I think might be fair for Forster.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's almost like you're saying projected to play NHL games means you're going to fill in on the fourth line on occasion.
And for the record, you do have to give Proman a little credit. You can't pay attention to everybody.
Well, no,
it might just be,
And I'm not going to criticize it because he defines very well what the parameters are. Like, I gave you the player eligibility thing where, like, based on age or whatever. The tier definitions are meant to show where in an average NHL lineup the player projects to slide. And that's where I kind of disagree with Forster, because I don't think he's just a guy who's going to play a few games. Like, okay. I think he's good enough to be a regular NHLer. The tool grades, which are more like when he goes in and dives into everything, skating, puck skills, hockey sense, compete level, shot, I understand what, like, he defines what he means by NHL average, and it's not meant to be a knock. It's meant to be a compliment. So,
right.
Like, I get that. I'm not reading into those. I do think the tier level for Forster is low. I think Forster can be a middle of the lineup guy.
I absolutely agree. But that is also, I think, a ceiling. And, given the Flyers' history in developing prospects,
sure,
it's hard to say he's going to hit that ceiling. So I don't hate a settling of, he'll play some games.
Sure. And I mean, like, and then you go from there, the last handful, which are pretty easy to go through. Ethan Sampson was number 6, which is interesting because like I said, I think there was a lot made. Not a lot made, but it's like compared to where Emil Andre is on that list. And like the concept that Andre
I certainly would have Emil Andre above an Ethan Sampson.
Yeah, exactly. And this is another. So how many draft prospects from this past year's draft class are we going to mention in this show? Because we've already hit a couple of them. Apparently number 7, though, on this list is Alex Kiernick, who was one of the mid-round picks that the team made. It's really interesting because to take a guy who he has listed 7th, projected to play NHL games, which is a fair assessment without knowing a lot about players in their draft year, but he has every skill listed as at least NHL average in his eyes. So that's an interesting, for a guy who was picked in the middle rounds, you would take NHL average from the middle rounds.
That's an above average prospect, right?
From that
for that draft position, absolutely. So
and by the way, the last player on the list, other than the guys who he lists as has a chance to play, number 8 was the only goalie to make the list, which would be Carson Bjarnason. Yeah.
Phew, a name that Jim Jackson is not going to be a fan of.
I mean, if everybody was able to learn all the other names that have kind of come in, we all got used to.
It just feels like an awkward series of syllables. Carson Bjarnason.
There's a certain point where you don't need to say the first name anymore, though. So if you can, if
Bjarnason becomes enough, then.
Although, can you imagine how great it's going to sound to hear left-handed larceny from Bjarnason?
Oh God. Okay.
It's too good. I'm sorry.
And among the had the chance to play, by the way, I did also want to shine a quick light on Bobby Brink. A guy coming back from some pretty major injury issues. We're working to see how his development continues to progress. He was an early second-round pick in 2019, so we're getting close to the clock starting to run out on him as a prospect as it is. But still, he's got some time. We'll see how he goes. We'll see if he can get a healthy year in.
It's going to be really interesting to see his camp because he's good enough to be an NHL player. He's already shown it a little bit. The injury last year derailed his season. He had to play in the minors just to kind of get a feel for the game again after missing so much time. And they're really smartly, I should add, there was no reason to bring him to the NHL when you didn't need to.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they didn't force that issue because you had every reason to play everybody else toward the tail end. If you wanted to bring, you want to play Sam Harrison, play Sam Harrison. You want to play Tyson Forster, play Tyson Forster. You want to do what they did with the defenseman at the end of the year and give, Addard's going to play a little bit. No, wait, we're going to go to Adam Ginning, and then we're going to go to, do it. By all means, do it. If they've been down in the minors all year and you think they're worth a look, by all means, do it. But Brink did not need to be forced into that role at the NHL level in 2 to 3, basically 2.5 months time.
He does not need that. Nope.
Yeah, so I think that was totally fair. It's, and obviously when we're talking about the prospect pool a little bit, one of the interesting things to kind of keep in mind is, and this is something where you kind of have to have a little control and also not getting too far ahead, but it's also kind of hard because of the fact that you do want to look ahead and think about the possibility that if the team is not very good this year and ends up in a lottery spot and you see the names that are floating around and you're going to hear about them more and more as the year goes on, then you start to let your mind wander about, well, what happens if they get one of them too?
Yep.
Especially when you're also holding on to a draft pick of a team the first round draft pick of a team, I should say, that is going to start the year really hampered by injuries.
Right.
That went so far in the playoffs last year that they emptied the tank, had players that were barely able to even physically get on the ice practically, that still did, and lost a lot of pieces along the way too, because there's guys who are not back, who did not come back, and they tried to replace them, but we'll see where that Florida pick goes and what happens if Florida doesn't either makes the playoffs and gets knocked out quick or doesn't win the lotto.
I was gonna say it is top 10 protected, so nothing.
Oh, I'm talking about what happens if it's 14th. Right.
Well, here's the thing, though. I can also see Florida. I'm looking at that potentially as a longer term piece. So what if Florida does just completely fall apart here?
Exactly.
It's a top 10 pick this year. Okay, that's fine. They keep it and it slides unprotected. Come on.
It could be interesting. I mean. Yeah. The only downside would be if it slides is that they would then be able to go into a full season probably more healthy. And let's put it this way, they still have guys who we know can play really well.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're telling me that in not next season but the season after, if you're able to start from the beginning fully healthy, Matthew Tkachuk is fine, Brandon Montour is fine, and Carter Verhaeghe is fine. Everybody's fine, and oh, by the way, who cares if who cares if Sergei Bobrovsky's your goalie? It might be Spencer Knight again by that point.
Yep, that's valid.
You would love it. I think everybody would love it if this pick turns out to be in that 14th
number 11,
range.
Right?
Well, 11 would be ideal. But being realistic, you really would love it if it was 14.
Absolutely.
In addition to the fact that you're probably picking top 10 for sure.
Yep.
Maybe even closer to, who knows, maybe closer to top 5. We'll see. But you're getting a lotto, like sort of a lotto pick. You're getting a chance at the lotto pick, I should say, is what I mean.
Well, and what you're getting is a first round pick, which can be used in transactions.
Sure.
That is the other thing is you're going to be you're going to be acquiring young talent in ways other than just the draft.
Well, you are, but the pipe dream, obviously, in the immediate is that you land in the top 3 somehow to be able to draft one of these forwards, like, whether it's Macklin Celebrini or whether it's Cole Iserman or whether it's Ivan Demidov or one of those 3 guys, and then, oh, by the way, somewhere in the middle of the round, if you can grab like a defenseman like Adam Juracek, who's David's brother, like,
there's some real value in that first round.
Aren't you setting yourself up a little nice here for, like, you're building a good prospect pool at that point if you do the same process, superstar level forward and solid defenseman, in the first round. Because they're going to have, like, when you review down, when we get to the actual regular season and we get closer to it, go down the list of guys on this roster who were former first round picks. It's insane.
It's not zero.
Or at least what it could be when you add in Gauthier and Mishkov and Bonk, and eventually, like, more than half the roster is going to be first round picks.
Right, and even beyond that, like, Bobby Brink was number 34.
Yeah, for real.
2 away from a first round pick. And the one other name I did want to mention on that list, by the way, is Elliot Desnoyers, a guy that we've talked about a little bit already, a guy that we've talked about quite a lot on previous episodes of the show here. A guy that we've liked, we're talking
the destroyer.
Right, we're talking about finding depth in the draft and getting these 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks to make your roster, make an impact. Elliot Desnoyers, 4th round pick in 2020, which, by the way, 2020, any draft pick hitting in 2020 is an absolute miracle.
Yeah,
that year and 2021 were just absolute insanity.
You know what I think about right away when you bring him up, honestly?
Yeah.
And he's obviously, because now he's past the point of junior level. He's pro. He's going to either play for the Phantoms or the Flyers.
I want to see him play Flyers games this year.
Oh, I think he definitely will.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is in training camp, though, I would love to see them put him, like, if they want to do him a favor in terms of the style that he needs to play to be successful, put him next to Garnet Hathaway as much as humanly possible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think there's a part of Danny Briere that's why you went out and got Garnet Hathaway, was to play next to guys like Elliot Desnoyers and to bring them into the NHL. With a bit of a bodyguard, but mostly just a mentor.
Right, and tell me that's not the style that he would need to have. Look, I think he's got a little bit more. He's got a little more goal scoring touch than Hathaway probably does, but in terms of the motor, that's exactly the same type of player.
I want Elliot Desnoyers to be the biggest jerk in Flyers history, and that is saying something. Okay, this team employed Mike Richards. Come on now.
Okay, so you also want him to hang around Travis Konechny then?
Absolutely. I want Elliot Desnoyers to be Travis Konechny's new Nolan Patrick.
Okay. Interesting.
I want them to be Riley and Jonesy from Letterkenny. I
like that.
I want Elliot Desnoyers to live in Travis Konechny's house. Travis Konechny's an established veteran. It's time to have one of the young kids live in the basement. You're on this team. He's got, four more years left on his deal? It's time to be a good veteran there, Travis.
Oh, no, Konechny only has 2 left.
He's only got 2 left. I'm sorry. But still, it's time to be a good veteran. He's
okay. So fine. If he's 27, or he will be 27. If you want him to live with somebody who's got more than 2 years left on his contract, then just say Scott Lawton. Okay.
Oh man, I really thought. Yeah, exactly. I mean, listen, I want everyone to live with Scott Lawton. I want Scott Lawton to just open house. And if not Lawton, if room is full everywhere else, there's no room at the end anywhere else. No, there's no room in Garnet Hathaway's house either.
Oh,
I guess we'll send him to Nick Delorier.
I knew you were going to go there.
All right. So we're talking about contract values. We're talking about who's going to be here in 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, speaking of 4 years.
I teased earlier in the show that there have been some contract extensions around the NHL, and there have been a couple. There have been a couple. Nothing really of super significance outside of the biggest contract in the NHL, at least in terms of AAV. Because Auston Matthews signs a 4-year extension at, what is it, 13.25?
13.25 mil, yes.
For 4 years.
Hit him with the 4 like Auston Matthews.
Hit him with the 4 like Auston Matthews.
I mean, that just is poetic. Just like that's poetic that it was 4 years.
So, Kevin, in year 5, can we talk about how this is already a failure? No, I'm kidding. But when will he go sign in Arizona, though?
That's interesting. Well, by that point, you would hope that you would think and hope that they would have.
You would think. Okay, but we probably thought that 6 years ago when they got kicked out of Gila River or whatever it was.
That's true. That's true.
But 4 years, biggest contract in the NHL in terms of AAV, surpassing Nathan MacKinnon's 12.6. But he will hit the market again in 4 years. And with what we have heard about the cap and the fact that we expect the cap to be maybe as much as $10 or $15 million higher 4 years from now, does it make sense for him to be kind of hedging his bets like this, getting the opportunity to hit the market at age 30 and get another big contract with kind of that expanded cap? And are we going to see more of this?
I think. Well, I'm kind of going to answer your second question first, I think, because sure, for him it makes tons of sense because he does position himself to have another big contract. I mean, does anybody have any reason to believe that this guy's going to slow down in the next 4 years as an individual? That no one's going to pay him like this?
Right.
Like, absolutely. He's definitely done himself a service in terms of preparing himself for another huge and not even just to prepare himself for another huge contract, but you're setting yourself up for exactly that, like 7 to 8 year length where it's like, the
last 3 years might suck, but that's okay.
Sure.
Right. They're not going to suck for him.
It's not it's an interesting contract in the sense that first of all, like the cap hit portion of this and everything like that, it depends on how you look at it. Because let's put it this way. You just brought up that the biggest contract prior to this was Nathan MacKinnon's. And then obviously, and MacKinnon surpassed Connor McDavid
12.5.
And so on, right? Like everybody kind of has been surpassing themselves a little bit in a way. Like Matthews is one, even prior to this cap hit once it kicks it, because it's not going to kick in for another year.
Right. He does still have one more year left at his 11.634 number.
Which, in fairness, is the 4th highest contract in the league right now. So that's what I mean. And then beyond that, it's Erik Karlsson, David Pastrnak.
When you sign a guy to a deal for the 4th highest value in the league, and then he goes out and scores 60.
Yeah.
You got to pay him.
Sure.
And he is, by the way, 121 goals away from tying Matt Sundin for the all-time Leafs record.
That's crazy.
Okay, how many does Matt Sundin have? Don't look it up. And I believe this is as a Leaf, too.
Oh, as a Leaf? Oh,
yes.
Because that's actually an important...
It's franchise record.
That's an important clarification since Matt Sundin also, maybe way lesser known to people who don't remember. For Quebec, yeah.
Yep.
Just
back when the Nordiques were a team.
Just prior to the Colorado move, too. It was very close to that.
He just missed that cup.
As a Leaf, how many goals did Matt Sundin score?
Well, I just told you that Auston Matthews is 121 behind him. So if you know how many Auston Matthews has, that'll get you there.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to think of because I know Auston Matthews. Let's just say he had 60 in a year. Obviously,
Auston Matthews' first goal this season will be a major milestone for him.
I think Matthews is at 300 already.
He is at 299.
Yeah, so he's at 300 right now. So Matt Sundin, I was going to say Matt Sundin
is at 420.
Right. So I was going to say, in my head, I'm like Sundin did not score 500 with Toronto.
But Auston Matthews, the owner of 160 goal season already.
Yes. I was actually just going to look up his
goals away.
Yeah, I was actually just going to look up too because Like
There is a world where he scores 60 this year and 61 next year.
That was exactly where I was going.
Now it's much more likely that he breaks it in, around Christmas time of year number 3.
Sure.
But still, he has set himself up to, over the 4-year span of this contract, even, if he misses his annual 6 to 10 games, because he does play a bit of a physical style, and has had some hand and wrist injuries. If he misses his typical 6 to 10, we are probably looking at that 3rd year. But still, we're looking at this kid who at 26 years old is poised to, over the next 36 months, become the all-time leading scorer for an Original Six franchise.
I'm going to tell you what, looking at his entire just career statistics and everything like that too, it blows my mind how many times we're going to be able to say this about players that played over this time frame, how much the half year of 21 and all that, how much that did to some numbers.
It has done some insanity.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing it up is because, okay, so for example, in the 1920 season, so obviously got cut off at the tail end. He had played every game of the season at that point, by the way, because 70 was in the right range. Like everybody had played something like between 68 and 71 or something like that, right?
In the darkest timeline, Alexander Ovechkin gets hurt 6 games before he would break the record.
Oh, sure.
In just the darkest timeline.
But what I'm getting at is that for a team that had still at least 12 games to go in their season, roughly, or around 12, or however you want to look at it, he already had 47 goals that year. He was getting to 55. Come on.
I know. Yeah, absolutely.
And then
he might have been pushing 60, honestly, because he is the hat trick kind of guy.
Sure. Now, and then in the next year, I'll level. He only missed 4 games in a 56 game season, so 41 in that time frame is still ridiculous. But imagine if it was the full 80. But imagine if it was the full 82. He was scoring 60 that year.
Yeah.
So
okay. Alexander Ovechkin is the greatest goal scorer in the league. Mm-hmm. Auston Matthews is the best goal scorer in the league.
Well, right
now.
Oh no! You're definitely there's an well, you're right about that. But here's the reason why I'm thinking that, because as much as everybody's going to follow the Ovechkin timeline and how and the eventual point where he does become the greatest goal scorer of all time by number,
right? There's
reason to look at the pace, the projection that Matthews is on, and think if the guy can play until 40, he'll do it.
Okay, but I'm not wishing ill on the guy. I'm not. I like Auston Matthews.
No, but you're worried about the injuries.
Man, he's had,
especially considering it's the wrist has been affected.
And it's not. He had a freak ankle thing and a freak elbow thing and a freak concussion and this, that, the other. It's pretty consistently the hands, the wrists, the arms, the elbows, that's the part that makes me nervous. And I hope that he is, I assume he is doing all the right things and taking care of himself the best as we can. But we have seen, I don't want to say better, but we have seen incredible hockey players whose bodies just quit on them. And it's a shame, and it happens to the best of them.
Sure. Now he's still young enough right now that it's probably not a huge factor. I mean, we got to be real about that. He's 20. He'll be 26 in September. Sure. So by the time the regular season starts, he'll be 26, and you can kind of start to, go from there. But I'm kind of okay. So I want to get back on another aspect of the contract for a second, because sure, for him it makes sense. And listen, I know that there's people out there who look at the value of the contract and wonder, is any player worth the let's be real about something. Any of these players who go out, if you go and look at, take what Connor McDavid did this past year, what David Pastrnak did this past year, what Auston Matthews is capable of doing with a 60-goal season, what Leon Draisaitl is able to do, even just the overall spectrum of what Nathan McKinnon can do or what Cale Makar can do, guys even like that, they're all underpaid.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of the way that other athletes get paid, they're all underpaid.
So did you hear the stat? So the contract that Auston Matthews signed, 4 years, $53 million, 13.25 per year. Mm-hmm. It was the exact same contract in terms of length and years. Nothing beyond that.
Okay.
As Grant Williams. Do you know who Grant Williams is?
He's an NBA player.
He's an NBA role player who is the 113th highest paid player in the NBA.
Sure. The NBA
They're all underpaid.
Well, the NBA is a star-driven league, and if the NHL acted like the same way, then yes, you would like. It's no different in most of these other sports. Why do you think every quarterback in the NFL goes out for the max deal that is, whatever it turns out to be, making 40, 45, $50 million a year? Why do you think that happens in Major League Baseball?
Sure.
Because there's kind of no capping it like that.
And that's what I was about to say, is that it's the game that NHL players play is cap percentage. What's the percentage of your cap the day you signed it, right? Everyone talks about that Sidney Crosby 8.7, blah, 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 blah. Auston Matthews' contract is, I think it's 15.8% or something like that of the Leafs cap at this, or at the day it's expected to kick in. Obviously, we don't know exactly what the cap will be, but the day it's expected, what it's expected to be. That is in line with the extension that McDavid signed.
Sure. It's
a little tiny bit more than McKinnon, but I mean, McKinnon was coming off such a value contract, it was going to be hard for him to get paid regardless. It's in line. The problem is the cap has just been so stagnant for the last 3 years for world shutting down reasons. That it's hard for a player to argue that his fair share of the cap is 18 million or 19 million or whatever Auston Matthews should, quote unquote, should be paying. I know Dom Lucian did do an article about, what Auston Matthews' true value would be.
Sure. And I think it's totally fair to analyze players in that way. Like, you're not going to tell me that guys like that, and even in sort of in yesteryear, like they're active players, but in the prime of their careers, that Ovechkin and Crosby didn't deserve the same type of thing. Like,
no, absolutely.
When you're on that elevated level, like to tell you all you need to know about the value of NHL players, go back and look up how much money Wayne Gretzky made in his entire career. And no, seriously,
it's stupid.
It's stupid. It's downright stupid that the greatest player in league history made that much money over his entire career, and that's the way it always was. And you look at contracts around the league today, and you see everybody else going up, and the NHL was stagnant.
It turns out the NHL players haven't won a labor disagreement essentially in their history,
right?
But anyway, international hockey's coming back in 2025. A World Cup of some variety, I guess? Question mark.
Yeah, maybe. I was one more thing on the Matthews thing for a second, because you were talking about, like, when you're talking about cap percentage. The other thing you have to factor in when you're talking about Matthews is what team he plays for. And I say that, like, I'm not saying that like just because it's Toronto, but it's look who else you're sharing the wealth with. You know what I mean? Like, in addition to the fact that you are going to start making $13.25 million next year, for the first season of that, John Tavares is making $11 million, and Mitch Marner is making $10.9 million.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, Morgan Riley is making $7.5 million. And there's another, there's just another big name free agent that's going to be on the market next year who needs a contract, who also could be making that level of money. William Nylander or anybody.
I was going to say, there's Nylander, and Marner's only got 1 year left.
Well, Marner's got 1 year left, but so Marner will still be under contract.
That's
for the first year. I'm saying you could be looking at a roster next year that has a $7.5 million defenseman and four forwards making 10 plus potentially.
I don't think Nylander gets 10 there. Now listen to what I said.
Yeah,
I don't think Nylander gets 10 there.
I think
if he stays in Toronto, it's under 10. I think if he wants 10, he goes somewhere else.
If he stays in Toronto, he gets the Johnny Gaudreau contract.
You're probably not wrong.
The cap going up and will allow him to get close to 10, but maybe not 10. And that's the price you're going to have to pay. He would get 10 if he decided to go and be the big guy somewhere else, or he might be under 10 if he decides I want to try this. But
is there a world where they convince John Tavares to fake an injury that last year and retire?
I don't know, but I mean, Tavares.
That'd be mighty convenient. He's starting to get old. Like, it's not.
He'll be 30. He'll be 33 by the time the season starts, and then you factor in playing 2 more years. He'll be 35. So going into the 25.
And the dude has some hard miles on him. He has taken some damage over the years.
Specifically, I'm sure you're thinking of the one in the playoffs a handful of years back. but obviously not this past year when he played heroics for Toronto in the first round.
Right.
But
when Corey Perry took his friggin' head off. Oh, by accident, but still. Oh.
No, but I hear you. But like the part that will crack me, because I don't know what's going to happen yet with Marner and Tavares with 1 year left, but it will truly crack me up if Matthews just signed this extension for the next 4 years, which kicks in literally next year. You've got to figure out what you're doing with Nylander beyond this year, and you have the other two, and Morgan Riley's making 7.5 on a contract that lasts until just the end of 29-30.
Yep.
Can you
to be fair, he's earned every penny of it.
No, but can you imagine if they go forward with the concept, with the belief, especially when you listen to anybody who's in Toronto, the belief that you've got to break up this core four? Can you imagine if it moves forward for the next 2, 3, 4 years of it's going to still be the core four?
I think that's why Kyle Dubas is in Pittsburgh.
So you think that Treliving is going to step in and do something about this?
No. I think
you think
that
Dubas,
core four is there. I think
you think Dubas wasn't going to allow it.
I think Dubas. Quite frankly, I think the Leafs are in a fairly similar situation to the Flyers under Chuck Fletcher, where it's not particularly
feel more and more like it, doesn't it?
Well, it's not particularly the GM doing the job. It is the president of hockey ops. It is the people above him.
So Shanahan,
who's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
And apparently, rumors mill, etc., whispers. Apparently, shortly after the season ended, they were all told that they were safe.
What's that? Shanahan and
no. The core four.
Oh, the core four. Yeah.
That none of them were getting traded. That they weren't going anywhere. That blah 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 blah.
Well,
shortly after Kyle Dubas. That whole situation where, Brendan Shanahan decided during a drive home to fire him, and some of the strangest press conferences in history, by the way.
Is that almost as good as showing up to Bruce Cassidy's living room to tell him he's fired?
It's probably better. Like, honestly, if you think about the insanity of it.
Or having Gerard Gallant take a taxi home from, the game after he's fired.
Right. I mean, Brendan Shanahan essentially said, I told him I'd sign him to a contract, but then I got stuck in traffic and I decided against it. I don't know. Go back and watch the press.
It was a mess.
Okay, so you have to watch Shanahan's end of season availability, and then Dubas's end of season availability, and then this press conference to understand the whole sequence.
Sure,
but it was a wild 48 hours or whatever it was. But I think that's the reason is that Kyle Dubas ended up leaving is because he was going to trade. Frankly, I think he was going to trade Mitch Marner.
Possibly, yeah.
Before the contract protection kicked in. And I think he had a deal, maybe not, an official deal on the table, but I think he was talking to people. I think he had frameworks in shape. I think he might have even gone to Brendan Shanahan and presented him with a deal.
Like a potential, yeah.
Right. And I think Brendan went, whoa, what do you mean trade Mitch? See ya. And here we are. So I think they are riding that core four to the dirt no matter what, unless William Nylander decides to price himself out.
The interesting part is I can understand having pause when it comes to Marner because look, Marner may be the best all-around player that they have at that point. So I understand the pause there. But at the same time, it's you got to make a choice at some point. It kind of is one of these things where these all can't coexist at one time for this long and expect to not it becomes what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right?
How long did it take the Flyers to figure it out?
Sure, exactly. So
then that's it. That's it.
Sure. So and that's the
how long is Brendan Shanahan willing to bash his head against the wall?
That's almost the element, I don't say the element of confusion, but it's that's almost this part of the part of the equation, which is so basically a guy gets fired from his job and has to go take a job in Pittsburgh instead.
Poor guy has to go get paid millions of dollars to GM
for having the gall to show up to the president of hockey operations office and say, I think I'm going to trade a star.
And that's why the NHL, winding it back to your original point, that's why the NHL is down here when all these other leagues are all the way up here. It really is. And it's...
It wasn't...
this isn't anything against, Brendan Shanahan personally. I'm sure he's a great guy, but
that player, obviously.
Oh yeah, but that attitude about, well, no, we have to keep this together, and also you're fired for disagreeing. Like, look at what Brad Treliving just did in Calgary last year. Like, he organized a big old trade, and I know it didn't work out, but you traded a star in Matthew Tkachuk for a star and a half in Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau. Brad Treliving made a great trade, and I know it didn't work out for Calgary that year, but
Calgary had bigger problems than the fact that it was just the stuff from the trade. Exactly.
But I just mean we've seen big 1-for-1 superstar trades recently. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you could find fair value for Mitch Marner.
It's not even just it doesn't even have to be 1-for-1 type trades anymore. Like in general, let's this way. This is a league where if Wayne Gretzky can get traded, anybody can get traded.
Man, like, seriously, it must be midsummer if we're pulling all these old cliches out the book.
Hey, listen, it is the month of when that trade went down. That did happen in August.
One of the first things if you've listened to this show for a while, you know that I'm a Steve Dangle fan. One of the first things Dangle said was that little part in my brain. So the contract is essentially all signing bonus.
Oh, sure, no kidding.
I think he's getting paid like less than $4 million of actual salary.
I wonder if it'll actually tell me that if I go.
It should be on CapFriendly. It should be on CapFriendly. I'm looking at.
Yeah, I want to see this.
And the little voice in the back of Dangle's head went, "That'll make him easier to trade."
This is amazing. His total salary to get to the $53 million is in 24-25, Auston Matthews' total salary will be $16.7 million. The year after, 15.2, then 11.08, and then the last year, 10.02.
Yeah.
Of that money, that's $53 million total. Of that, base salary is only $3.35 million.
Yep.
Over 4 years. It is less than $1 million every year.
Almost
and signing bonuses,
$50 million in signing bonuses.
He is making, and I'm not kidding when I say this number, he is making in that first season of the contract extension $15.925 million in signing bonuses.
Man, it just sounds like a number Dr. Evil's asking for. $15 million.
Yeah, it's $1 trillion.
It's so much money. Just here's a check for $15 million. Go to the local PNC and give it to the teller.
That's Brendan Shanahan opening up the blank checkbook.
Yeah.
That's his blank checkbook statement.
Okay. Is there anything else that we had to get into this week?
You did touch briefly on the possibility that international stuff could be happening again soon. It would be nice. It would be nice to.
The World Cup was fun.
The NHL needs the World Cup because you need to have a platform where you put the best of the best, both with and
you need best against best. Absolutely.
Right. And you need to create dream teams again a little bit too. Like when that go look at the first ever World Cup rosters in '96.
Dope.
Go look at those rosters and tell me how that's not destined to succeed. And they didn't do it for a little while, and I understand that. But even when they did the whatever one it was, what was it, 2016?
16 or 17, something like that.
I think it was the one. That was
Great.
phenomenal.
It was great. And okay, here's the thing. NHL, Gary, when you bring this back.
Gary.
Don't change the rules for Team North America. Don't. Leave it as is. Leave it as is. I don't care if all the old Canadians and all the old Americans complained that the kids were beating them. I don't care. Keep the rules the same.
The rule was it was 23 and under on those rosters, I believe is what it was.
I don't believe those players could play for their national roster. Like, I don't think it was a seniority thing. I think if you were under 23, you had to be on Team North America.
Oh yeah. And
Connor McDavid couldn't be on Team Canada.
No, what's gonna be even more fascinating now is think about this. It's not gonna happen next offseason. I understand that, but all right, fine. Go within the next 3 years because the 3-year window is fair. All right,
I think they said 2025.
25-26, right? It was 25-26 season was when they were gonna.
I think right before the 2020.
Right before that, yes, in the summer, because it's usually in August. They try to do. Okay, so picture, if you will, that by this point, Connor McDavid and
World Baseball Classic.
Well, Connor McDavid and Auston Matthews, for example,
are both in the older camp on.
Well, have
Team
graduated
Canada,
from Team
USA.
North America,
Oh man.
But you know who hasn't?
Connor Bedard
And Adam Fantilli, and even a handful of others like Mason McTavish will not have graduated from that group yet. You know what I mean?
Oh, that is going to be fun.
That's what the people want. Give the people what they want, the ability to put some of the best players next to each other on, like, because then you're getting a roster that looks like it does. Like McDavid's going to play with, I'm trying to put somebody else up there because he's not playing with Draisaitl, he's not playing with Matthews either. Matthews would be on the U.S. team, but okay, fine. So Auston Matthews gets to play with Jack Eichel.
Man, Kel McCarr will probably.
No, McCarr would play. Yeah, McCarr would
be on Team USA, right?
No, McCarr is Canadian.
Oh, you are right. He went
played
to college.
He played in college, but he's Canadian.
No, you're right. He'll be on regular Team Canada by then.
But that's what I'm saying. Okay, so
man.
So McDavid and McKinnon and McCarr can all play with each other. And by the way, if Crosby's still playing, he gets to play.
Yep.
See where I'm going with this now?
Yep. This is going to be good.
And oh, by the way, imagine how much better not even four, because by this point they haven't had one since the 2016 one, right? So
correct.
You're almost 10 years down the line from that. Imagine how much better the European team's going to be.
Oh yeah, way better.
Like nobody was even thinking about Draisaitl like that at that point. Now you're going, holy smokes! Look, you're going to put Draisaitl and Pasternak next to each other on like. Hello, This is what people want, and then you're putting those two guys up against the U.S. team, and again, here's Auston Matthews, here's hell, you can still have, for all we know, you can still have Patrick Kane skating around out there, and there's the old with the new, that's what I'm saying, it's
Jonathan Toews.
Toews would be Canada.
That's fair. We'll figure it out. We have dream matchups all over the place. Maybe we'll touch on this a little bit more on our next show. Maybe we'll see if anything more solid comes out of it between now and then.
Yeah, we'll see. There are still a few pending news stories we're hoping to get something on soon.
Still no contract on Morgan Frost.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. We're waiting on that. I mean, look, you're getting to the point where eventually it's going to have to happen soon in time for training camp. So
right. You would think.
Although, correct me if I'm wrong. I do remember. I think that when Provorov and Konechny had to sign their first contracts outside of the ELCs, it was a long grind.
It was.
To training camp. I think one of them actually happened during camp.
I think Provorov was after the first day.
Something like that, but it took a while. It's not unheard of to go that far. So
right, but. Either way,
but we are waiting.
Yes, and by the time our next show rolls around, we will be 2 weeks closer. We'll be kind of knocking on the door of training camp pretty soon. There,
we're getting much more and more closer to the 2-week gaps disappearing and going back to weekly. We're very close,
and I'm excited for that. So until then, we're gonna get out of here. Check us out on the social media. We're at YWT Podcast pretty much everywhere. Kevin's at Kevin_Durso pretty much everywhere. Get us everywhere you get your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. And until then, 2 more weeks, and we'll see you.